and welcome to BRAIDAR, the Business of Beauty. I'm Jaden Paru, and I will be your host for this radio show series. So, going off of last week, we talked about braids and the importance of braids culturally, as well as on an individual level to people within the Black community, and also the impact that that has on things like inclusion and EDI initiatives in different institutions, and how those can work hand in hand to kind of improve the lived experience of minoritized students. So today we are kind of going to segue into another thing that has to do with individualized beauty and the sort of personalization element that a lot of beauty brands are tapping into now, which is dress-up games. Now, I know that a lot of us have had experience with them online, whether it's on the Barbie website, whether it's Girls Go Games, whether it's even like Movie Star Planet. But what I find really interesting is that sort of segue from the purely recreational uses that we might have thought of when we were younger, especially, to now being able to see the actual like strategy behind brands adopting such technologies and such using such platforms to leverage their offerings, like their products or their services. So yeah, today's episode is called Dress Up Games, Virtual Worlds, and the Future of Phygital Beauty. And I'll explain what Phygital Beauty is as we go on. But first off, I wanted to start with actually giving you guys some background into BRAIDAR itself, because as I said in the previous episode, the BRAIDAR business was the inspiration behind like wanting to like dive into what beauty means to like different people, different beauty brand strategies, and all that good stuff that we can kind of unpack in subsequent deep dives. So I thought I'd give a little bit of a description as to what BRAIDAR is before jumping into today's topic. Basically, getting braids at university shouldn't be stressful, but that's where BRAIDAR comes in. BRAIDAR is your personal braid radar. It's Pinterest meets Acuity for students with beauty side hustles, be that braids, nails, lashes, brows, or wig installs, the list goes on, to connect with students who need their services. So BRAIDAR is a social commerce platform where clients come to be inspired for and to make their next booking, and where stylists can manage their businesses and portfolios. As a user, you can search for styles in a variety of ways, and you get access to discovery feeds of looks all done by stylists/technicians that are near you. So with comprehensive style details like 360 views, as well as on-site booking and seamless payment options, your appointment is just a few clicks away. Both parties are freed from the back and forth of inquiring, of haggling and organizing over WhatsApp or even Instagram DMs, meaning you have more time to spend on the parts of the beauty business or the beauty process that you actually love. What's more, if you're a stylist or technician, you have exclusive access to our suite of custom booking management tools, like our built-in scheduler and personalized finance tracking as well. So that could be for your business goals, giving you info on your budget, expenses, income, invoices, and more, as well as to analytics tracking for the content on BRAIDAR that features your work. This removes the barrier of accounting and marketing know-how from your side hustle endeavors, allowing you to make informed decisions about your business using our insights and data. Clients also have access to a personal account page where they can view their saved looks, manage posts, create or update reviews, and more. BRAIDAR ultimately aims to be your virtual beauty service concierge, making life easier for both stylists and clients, and creating a celebratory, safe space for Black women in PWIs to thrive. Yeah, so that's the kind of overview that I wanted to share. And without further ado, I'll dive right into today's topic. So let's start at the beginning, I feel. A lot of us, especially in Generation Z, have distinct sort of memories of going onto these websites that have hundreds of flash games that of different genres, but one of the most popular ones are dress-up games. So be that a dress-up game that's themed around a particular show, a particular kind of fairy tale or creature, like be it fairy, princesses, that kind of thing, or even a dress-up game that's more like everyday or more slice of life, like hipster college girl dress-up game. You know, you could, whatever you're looking for, you can find it in those kind of easy to play, easily accessible games. So what I found was that in being able to sort of start with the base of, you know, just the virtual doll or the avatar that you start with, you can actually make a lot out of the tools that you've been given, in a sense of how you combine the different shirts and trousers or skirts or the hair that you use. And even within the hair, like you could customize the back separately from the fringe, for example, and you can really add those like subtle details of highlights and all that kind of thing that would make the end result of like the finished avatar something that's uniquely yours. So it would be a case of, even if my friend and I were to use the same game, like to be playing on the same like platform, the avatars would look completely different and would be completely unique to us. And so I think that in that way, it was really easy for, at least like speaking from my own experience, to form a personal connection with such games, because that was an avenue or an outlet for like personal expression, for you to explore your personal style without having to make the actual, you know, real world investment of buying the clothing and then trying it on for yourself, especially as a child. Like, for example, there's still that aspirational gap between the sort of ideas of the beauty world and the fashion world as they're represented to you and your own lived experience as a child. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, the fashion dolls that we played with in real life, like the actual plastic dolls, they were rarely, like, they're either baby dolls or they're like millennial teenage and above dolls, if you get what I mean. There's no like 7-year-old doll that I remember having. So because there's that sort of distance between you and the representations of like, I wouldn't say representations of beauty, but representations of creativity with fashion, I suppose that's how I'd put it. Because there's that distance between you have to find a way to bridge it. And I think for a lot of us, you have to find that way to bridge that distance. And I think for a lot of us, the internet allowed us to do that conveniently and cheaply, like, i.e. for free. So that was really useful in that regard. And I think as well as that, what ends up happening is that our generation builds up a sort of affinity for and a sort of innate like understanding of how to use platforms that take that like avatar customization approach. And so what you'll find is that nowadays, when brands are more and more kind of focusing and turning their attention to how they can tap into the Gen Z market, especially as Gen Z is going from like being considered quote unquote Carlies, as in can't afford real life yet, going from being considered a Carly kind of demographic to a, oh wait, actually these guys have a fair bit of disposable income. These guys are interested in spending in the areas in which we have products to offer. That change of thinking is also coming with a change in approach, I've noticed, at least from my sort of experience and research. And so what you find is that more and more brands are wanting to tap into this element of the personalization and the customization that dress-up games and also virtual worlds afford users, but specifically tailoring it to their own product offerings or even their own branded or like in-house platforms, which I think is very, very interesting. And yeah, just on that note of virtual worlds, I know that I kind of set the scene using the dress-up games, but actually virtual worlds are another sort of layer on that. They take that personalization of the dress-up games and almost like take it to another level, because it's not only that you're customizing this character, but you actually get an environment in which to immerse that representation of, whether it's a representation of you or just a representation of a character that you've made, I think there's still that same strong personal attachment that you feel to it either way. And so actually having those settings to immerse your character in, and also having the ability to sort of interact and communicate with other users, that again, it just emphasizes the fact that it's a very powerful tool for creating a sense of, I suppose you could say, identity, and just a sense of belonging in a community, even if that community is like solely online. Like if you think about Club Penguin, or you think about like Build-A-Bearville, which is my favorite online virtual world. So yeah, there's that aspect of it that brands are sort of aware that this new market that they want to cater to is familiar with, and so they're like, okay, how can we harness that for the 2020s? How can we harness that for the cultural climate in which we're in, and the sort of hyper individualized and sort of almost fragmented way in which young people nowadays are choosing to express themselves and to engage with like different subcultures and communities, and yeah, things like that. So something that's been quite interesting in a lot of the brands' like conceptualizations of these virtual worlds and Phygital beauty, which is basically physical and digital mixed together, but for beauty. So something interesting is that there's this idea of the almost like interoperability of purchases. So if you think of something like a platform where a bag retailer offers you the chance to use their products in game for your avatar, so you can use it to like complete your outfits, like make different looks and everything like that. But then, as well as you being able to purchase the item in game, you can actually purchase that same bag in real life. So you see that customization then takes on another element of being almost like a funnel for the actual user behind the screen to think, oh yeah, this looks really nice on my avatar, and I could actually get it in real life. Like, because you already have that association and that link with your avatar and your virtual world, it's easier for you to kind of conceptualize having like owning that object in real life, because you already like own it in the virtual sphere, you know? So that's pretty cool. And I think again with the climate in which businesses operate and in which we all live today, I think a lot of that functionality has been called like, or rather falls under the metaverse umbrella. So you guys will obviously remember, like, for the past few years, the metaverse has kind of been a buzzword in terms of the tech industry, startups, like notable pivots from bigger companies as well. So that idea of just trying to bridge the online and offline worlds is some of the core thinking that underpins a lot of the brand's phygital beauty strategies, and you know, this harnessing of dress-up game functionality for real world brand affinity, and sort of building that up amongst a new user base, or like market, like target audience basically. So yeah, and I think another element in which that can go the other way, in terms of, instead of the intention starts with the online like avatars and then moves into the physical world, it can actually go from physical to the metaverse, if we want to call it that. So if you take the example of Build-A-Bearville, which was a hugely popular online world created by the Build-A-Bear Workshop company. So what would happen is that you can make an online avatar and customize them, and then get a house and just explore the world and the different seasonal regions that would pop up like in real time, which kept you like, again, coming back and logging back into the platform. But I think a key part of it was that if you made a real Build-A-Bear in real life, you can use their birth certificate to log, like essentially register them into the world. So then they appeared with your avatar, and you can interact with them and play with them and like dress them up. I remember like my Build-A-Bear is called Amy, and I just used to buy different things for her, and we had this huge house, and we just have fun. And it's kind of like you could live out those pretend games and those stories that you made with your bear in real life in this virtual world. So it's almost like another way of projecting your imagination onto this other medium and like experiencing it a second time, if that makes sense. So again, it's like harnessing that sense of wonder, that sense of infinite sort of possibilities when it comes to play. And I think that was something I really enjoyed. And another way that they harness this kind of going from the physical to the digital realm, which to kind of put it simply, I'll just refer to it as like omni-channel sort of capabilities. Omni-channel is basically all about how, for example, if we're talking about retail, all about how retail can take a customer from their like in-person physical experience and then their digital or like in-app experience or website experience seamlessly. So it's about that seamless dipping in and out of the physical and digital and making that process feel intuitive and efficient. Yeah. So another way in which Build-A-Bear kind of harnessed omni-channel capabilities to further leverage their like proto-metaverse endeavors is that if you went into the real, like the physical Build-A-Bear workshop and you got to the part where you can buy all the clothing and the accessories and everything, there's also a section in the shop where you can buy like credits for the Build-A-Bear world, because another part of the key functionality of virtual worlds is their in-game currency. So Build-A-Bear had bear bills as their main currency, which you can earn from like playing games, like trading, different like quests and things like that. But they also had another sort of, I suppose you could call it like a premium tier currency, which was only available if you bought the like vouchers in store. So if you think about it like App Store credits, that's essentially the format in which you would buy those vouchers and that like currency. So it would be a certain amount of real pounds or real dollars or any currency you used, which would translate into a certain amount of the premium tier in-game currency, which is how a lot of like Robux on Roblox is like that, but you had to get the voucher. So yeah, that would allow you to get like these sort of exclusive fashion items and like furniture items, and it also had a certain like almost like a membership quality to it. Like it would buy you access to certain things that on the normal tier, like the free tier, you wouldn't have access to. So again, it incentivized kids to lean into that like pester power and be like, oh yeah, I want to get this voucher, like it's important. And yeah, they through like parents or guardians or family members buying those vouchers. Again, Build-A-Bear Workshop could further harness their online offering to generate like real world revenue. So that was something very interesting and something which, again, like even up until now, existing virtual worlds are taking advantage of and like leaning into. So I think another thing that is very interesting about this sort of wave of the metaverse is the gamification of e-commerce and the gamification of shopping and that whole experience, whereby if you have an avatar and you're buying clothes for them and those clothes are linked to real world purchases or real world products, it's almost masking the fact that you could set up a whole virtual world just as a marketing, like part of a marketing campaign to funnel users to those real world items. But it's masking in a way that customers happily engage in because you're providing the value of, entertainment. And yeah, that's something that I'm really personally interested in, that whole area of like e-commerce kind of pushing forward into like gamification and like social commerce, and that's part of the thing that I want to definitely explore in the future, like in my career or just any things I'm doing, because I think it's such an exciting space, and it's I think especially in the West it's still being figured out, because from my research, like I know that it's already in like it's already been implemented and it's found success in China, for example. That's one market where social commerce is really sort of like this wide adoption. It's it's proving successful for the brands that have implemented it, as well as that gamification aspect, which you can see with even Temu. You can see that whole element of making the process of logging back in, or buying this thing before the timer runs out, or spinning this wheel and watering your plant to get certain rewards that you can redeem for actual products. I think that all links back to this sort of strategy. So it's very interesting. So up until now, I've spoken more about the sort of Phygital beauty campaigns, or rather like the implementations of Phygital beauty that have used existing platforms. But I also want to say that it doesn't have to be an existing platform. It can also be something built sort of in-house or built as a standalone, rather than you going on Roblox to host like a your brand world. Or, I know that, for example, Glossier have done a collaboration with Animal Crossing, that kind of thing. It doesn't always have to be leveraging an existing platform, although that might be easier in terms of there's the user base is already there, and you can kind of meet people where they already hang out, which I know is an important aspect of trying to get brand like recognition and trying to like drum up that interest. But another sort of avenue of interesting developments have been with companies like Prada, who've done a Phygital beauty initiative with a digital artist called Inez Alpha. And basically this whole initiative was chronicled by a website called stylist.com. They do basically consumer insights in different industries and different like consumer trends, like for the future, just giving businesses a chance to leverage those for their strategic planning and like future forecasting and things like that. So yeah, there was an article published on the 4th of August 2023 by Maya Regan, and she basically describes how Prada and Inez Alpha developed this portal where customers can use avatars with like varying various skin tones. That was hard to say for some reason. To actually test out Prada's new line of like different makeup elements, and for example like a matte lipstick and different things like that, and actually testing out how different variations of the same product would look on different skin tones. And I think especially in terms of getting that consumer engagement and like customer acquisition, it's quite useful, because then the barrier of people having to go to like a physical store or like to handle the lipstick in person, or to like order it on, even if they see it on a normal website, like a normal e-commerce website, for them to order it, handle it, and then there's a possibility that they decide they don't like it, and then that's not the ideal aim for Prada. They'd want like customers to like it so they can get those like recurring purchases and like referrals and different things like that. So this kind of removes some of the friction from that process, and some of the minimizes some of the negatives, I feel, of how the process is at the moment, like without such innovation. So it's very interesting how this sort of democratizes that process of like the virtual try-on, if you think about that. Like I know a lot of brands are also doing this in terms of like the fashion space, where you have an avatar that has your exact dimensions, and like you can even customize to look like you, and then you would use their products, like their hoodies, for example, or their their trainers, for example, and you'd put that on your avatar and then sort of use that to gauge whether you think it would look good on you. So again, that's very useful. And I think especially coming out of the pandemic, a lot, even though in-person shopping has kind of made a rebound and people are wanting those more experiential moments when it comes to shopping, which I'll talk about in a future episode. But the fact still remains that the usefulness and especially in terms of like economizing your time, that aspect of online shopping innovations have not been lost on consumers. And I think that's something that they will still tap into, but just in tandem with those like experiential, in-person, immersive, exciting experiences, which is another thing I'm very interested in. But I'll refrain from spoiling that too much until we get to that episode. So I think so basically the fact that you can kind of initiate the base for the customization in terms of like you make the avatar, again, adds to that sense of like feeling seen by brands. Because often, even if you look at like e-commerce as a sort of, as it stands, if you understand what I mean, like a normal website that has product pictures of the model wearing the product, it's rarely ever like a variety of models wearing wearing the same product. It might just be like one or two, and so that means you have one or two representations of who might look good in the product, if that makes sense. Even though, it's obvious that to date this has not been a huge hurdle for consumers, but I think that's more so because people are used to the fact that, okay, they're not going to have every person under the sun wearing this one pair of jeans for me to like judge for me to use other people as a gauge to see if it will look good on me. But I think at the same time, if you can get as close to that as possible in a digital twin, virtual representation sort of way, then that will also be a point of difference for a brand. And that will also be something that consumers will, I think, value. And it doesn't have to come from the brand themselves, like making 10 million avatars. It can be your avatar, and then the product itself, or like the digital version of the product, adapts to your avatar's dimensions. Just like the virtual worlds and the dress-up games. So another thing that might be of not concern, but of particular, just something to watch out for, something of interest for brands or even just normal people, developers and stuff that might be looking to get into this phygital beauty and fashion space, is the uncanny valley. And now the uncanny valley is a concept I feel like it's been widely discussed online about how if people are creating representations, especially of humans and like human life, then there's almost like a spectrum from sort of super cartoonish and very distinguishable from like real humans to on the other end of the spectrum to being like almost like 99% lifelike and like near perfect copy of how humans actually look. So in that, like, apart from those two extremes, the middle bits and everything in between has obviously varying degrees of realism. And like, it's a kind of like realism on one end, stylization on the other end. But people have found and like kind of documented that as you go closer, like from the stylization and more moving towards the realism end, that there's a particular point in that spectrum or that graph where your representation, be it your like 3D virtual model, be it your like robot, your AI robot or things like that, where it gets to a point where it's getting closer to realism, but it's not quite realistic. Like our brains can still sort of pick up that something's not quite natural and not quite right. And so that actually creates a feeling of distrust and sometimes even revulsion from people, like just as a sort of something that's under the surface that we react to. So in essence, like, it may be like, you know how some, for example, some robots with hyper realistic features, because there's something, because our brains detect that there's something missing, because it's somewhere on that realism end of the spectrum, but it's in the end of the spectrum that has a dip almost on the graph in terms of like our response to it and us being convinced by it to a certain, like, because that dip is reflecting that our response to it and us being convinced by it is lowered. Then what the result is that people feel distance from like that super realistic robot or even that super realistic 3D rendering like on a computer. And obviously this is not something that brands actually like want. Brands wouldn't want their offerings which are meant to encourage like hyper personalization and individualism and feeling seen by a brand and like you belong in that sense of brand affinity and feeling loyal to a brand. They wouldn't want something that's meant to do that to end up alienating and like putting off customers, you know? So I feel like that, in my personal opinion, that at the moment, a lot of, maybe not a lot, but at least the ones that I've seen, some of them have kind of ventured towards that side of things where I do recognize like for their particular product offerings or for their like the kind of company that they are, they will require a certain level of realism to successfully pull off that use case. Like if someone's testing out how like a haircut might look on them, you know, it's less value to the consumer if it's like a cartoon with a haircut that you like than if it were someone who actually looked like you with a haircut that you like, because obviously the purpose that you're using that feature for is not necessarily for character creation, but it's for like checking if you're actually going to commit to that purchase. So it's essentially that part of the funnel, and then therefore it takes on a more functional purpose rather than recreational and leisure and that whole like side of virtual gaming. So yeah, I think that's something that maybe as we experiment more with the technology behind it and as we further innovate and build up upon like existing innovation, that's something that might improve for phygital beauty offerings. Because I do think that, again, like it would be useful for a lot of companies, but perhaps at this stage, it's perhaps too much in that early stage for the kind of adoption and the kind of embrace that, you know, that super diehard proponents and super sort of engaged and you know, people who've spent years researching and working on it might feel it, you know, might expect, or rather might feel that such advancements warrant, which, you know, they might rightfully feel that way, but it's just, there's that, again, that distance between someone who has a lot of experience and knowledge and sort of can see how it can develop further and be refined further and iterated, and then on the other side, the consumer who's only seeing this version that you put out and kind of has a more immediate reaction to it, like that instinctive reaction. So yeah, but definitely, I do think that the metaverse has a role to play in the future of e-commerce, and yeah, I just want to, if ever I, you know, met someone working on this, I'd want to definitely like encourage them to keep on going, keep on iterating, and like exploring new use cases. Yeah. So there was another thing I was going to say about this uncanny. I think it was about the uncanny valley. And yeah, I think for certain use cases, like for example on Roblox, obviously people don't look like Robloxians. I feel like hopefully that's common knowledge, but yeah, that doesn't seem to stop the effectiveness of certain Roblox like brand activations. So even if, like, for example, if a brand collaborates with a particular Roblox mini game that's centered on like dressing up and fashion and things, even if their products, which they essentially like make into a skin for Roblox avatar, even if the way that it wraps on the avatar is not the way at all that it would look on a human, I feel like in those cases, it's more about the entertainment value and more about the brand, what's it called? Like brand salience, yes, rather than a strictly functional, like funnel, marketing funnel based like strategy. Because obviously behind any move that a brand makes, behind any like activation that they create or platform or innovation, there is strategy that underpins it. So the team would go and just outline sort of like what's any issues that the brand is facing or goals that the brand wants, and then break it down into like how sort of like measurable metrics that you can use to sort of represent these either the problems or the like the opportunities, and then from that develop strategy for how can we, if it's like closing a gap in market share or if it's, you know, increasing brand salience or something like that, like tangibly, how can we, what tangible data metric can we use to, can we like either improve or if it's like in the case of costs reduce to achieve this qualitative strategy goal, you know? So this kind of strategy that a brand is like working with will determine whether they go more for this entertainment, like less realistic route and more about brand salience and things like that, or the like strictly functional, you know, marketing funnel, like use case in essence. So yeah, back to the Roblox example. So again, because it's about that entertainment experience and about the brand, like the salience of the actual like logo, be it, for example, I feel like it suits a particular target audience and it suits a particular like, again, it suits like existing platforms, because if you want that recognition and if you want to just get the logo out there, then you need somewhere that the eyes like that already have eyeballs on it, if that makes sense. So it makes sense to partner with a popular mini game, you know, and a popular platform that hosts the mini game. So yeah, again, the fact that it's on Roblox doesn't mean that it's exclusively a campaign targeting like Gen Alpha or Gen Z, but I think because there are like older people that play it, but you know, it's still a fact that the majority is within that like Gen Alpha / young Gen Z cohort. But again, the fact that they are choosing Roblox, I feel, is something that you can do if one of your like strategic goals is to start that flywheel of like lifetime customers. Because something that we've been learning in like my advertising module and my behavioral decision making module, that's just an unpaid shout out to those two modules. They're really good, and as is my leadership development one. Like, okay, it's a bit off topic, but yeah, one thing we've kind of been learning about in really all three of the modules is how, be it a brand, be it a movement, be it a particular like influencer or person, if you can kind of hook a particular like prospective consumer in an earlier stage, the easier it is for you to build on that and retain them throughout the like sort of lifetime of that yeah. So if you think about, you can think about it in terms of age, or you can think about it in terms of like when they like whenever they encounter your brand. But if the sooner you can hook them, the easier it is for your brand or even your personal brand or your company to be ingrained in their like everyday life and their conceptualization of whatever like niche or industry you're in. So just take the example of that I gave at the beginning of the episode in terms of the virtual worlds that I really liked, or the dress up games that I really liked. Like, because I had that early exposure to them, those are the examples that are my go-tos for explaining that experience and explaining that sort of just like the nostalgia and the memories that I've attached to that experience extends to the brands, like extends to Build-A-Bear Workshop. Again, unpaid. I've not received any checks from Build-A-Bear Workshop, so this is all like a real-time case study of what I'm trying to explain. So yeah, I think again, platforms like Roblox have that strategic benefit for brands, especially beauty brands, because a lot of the like Roblox buying and like avatar customization culture is centered around like almost like replicating certain beauty trends that are in like real life or are in different art styles, if that makes sense. Like that's a whole nother conversation, but maybe that could be another episode or mini episode if you guys are interested. But yeah, I think that's definitely there's a lot going on in terms of the world of that like leaning into the omni-channel and the metaverse, Phygital beauty and fashion, and even in the world of like businesses that you might not think would leverage such an approach. You'd be surprised at the kind of reach that this concept has. So I definitely feel like in the future we're going to see a lot more of that, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to gauge like in real life if the things that like we're reading about and that I'm talking about and that we're discussing do actually come to pass in that same way. Because I think, no one actually knows what will happen, but it's still fun to sort of strategize and forecast certain things. So if you're interested in that, I would definitely recommend, as I said before, the website Stylus. I think they're just really good at that, especially they do a range of industries, but especially I feel for pop culture insights, Gen Z insights, fashion and beauty. That's like some of the main things I go there for, as well as like retail trends and again that experiential shopping, like interesting things that are happening in those spaces. I feel like Stylus is a great place to find that. Again, I've not been paid a dime for this. I just think it's cool. So I think they do have a subscription, like it's subscription based, but if that's something that you really like, I thought I'd share that. So I think that basically there's a lot that can kind of overlap with the different trends or the different strategies that I'll outline in this radio show series. But kind of giving you guys a taster of next week, I was thinking that it would be really nice to talk about the impact of fashion dolls, like this time not digital dolls, but plastic, like real life dolls, on Gen Z conceptualizations of beauty, and particularly beauty on one end, but even more so like fashion. And I think relationship to expression through fashion and specific fashion trends that have manifested in the past like 6 years. For example, as we all have seen, the Bratz dolls, I feel like that's just like such an interesting case of, is it life imitating art or art imitating life? Because obviously you've got like, now is it 22 years between the first edition Bratz dolls and now, like where you see there's an ongoing influence of their ethos and the different styles and outfits that they've come out with over the years on the generation that grew up playing with the dolls. So there's a whole lot to unpack there, and even like I think just kind of literally breaking the mold of like, because if you think about how dolls are made in the factory, there's obviously like face molds and like body molds and stuff, but Bratz literally broke the mold in terms of just being a bit more going outside of a certain convention and choosing to, I think, highlight different features than were previously highlighted and work with different dimensions and I think in doing that, they actually opened up a sort of more of that conversation of widening the scope of beauty that is shown to young people, especially in terms of like different ethnicities, different features, different phenotypes. Like it doesn't all have to look one way. And so yeah, even just the the size of their heads and their feet, like there's a whole sort of analysis of like what like the connotations of characters having bigger heads to make them look more like childlike and more sort of like not threatening and things like that. And so I think there's definitely a lot to unpack there. But don't take this as me sort of dissing Barbie, because obviously in my explanation, you as I'm saying, like they're breaking the mold and they're like opening up the conversation. Like naturally, I feel like the thing that people would think that they're reacting against is Barbie. And while that may be true, I definitely do think that Barbie has also had a huge impact on not just Gen Z's conceptualization of fashion, but like like millennials, Gen X, like so many generations that have now had their kids and been able to pass that on have been impacted in indirect or direct ways by the Barbie brand. And Barbie herself, like if I were to use the actual like molds that the doll uses and the like I don't know, the kind of fashions that she's dressed in, even her hair, even her like makeup like prints, like as in the makeup looks that they print on the doll with whatever they use in the factory. So the way that that changes with the times, I think is very interesting. And for next week, I'll kind of focus on the like mid 2000s, then going into like 2010s, you know, because I think the relationship between Barbie's target audience and Barbie kind of is reflected in how Barbie is presented to them. So like, oh, okay, I don't want to give too much away, but it's interesting how Barbie can go from someone you view as your older sister to, I feel nowadays, in terms of the doll, like I'm not talking about the movie, just the dolls and that side of things. I feel like now she's more presented as your counterpart. Like, even, okay, I really don't want to spoil too much, but this is just too much of an interesting like deep dive for me to gloss over. So final tidbit I'll give of that is, even if you look at the Barbie movies, like I think it was possibly Barbie Swan Lake, where at the beginning she's talking to her sister, and her sister's like, Barbie, you're so cool, you're so good at ballet, I can never be like you, I want to be you. And Barbie's like, no, be you. And it launches into the movie. So if you compare that kind of frame narrative and that representation of Barbie as a guiding figure, as like an aspirational figure, as like that older sister figure, to I think some of the more recent movies where she's, number one, her age has been reduced, her design is different, and her role in that sort of media representation of her. And by more recent movies, I mean the animated ones. Again, not the not the one with Margot Robbie. I mean the cartoon ones. So yeah, her role is kind of different, and by extension, the way she interacts with her like consumers in terms of how consumers view her, like this new generation coming up on like the new stuff of Barbie, is different. So I think that's really fascinating, and the reason as to why I think is very interesting and it can't be analyzed in isolation. You have to take into account like the rise of Bratz at the beginning of the century, or even the rise of like LOL dolls, you know, that kind of riff off of Bratz. Okay, giving away too much, but you'll definitely have to be there to to hear the rest. It's definitely an interesting topic for sure. And so I think to round up this episode on Phygital beauty, on the metaverse for fashion and beauty and what that can hold, I think one interesting space definitely that I've seen, although I've not like personally engaged with it, but I've definitely seen it from the outsider perspective and seen the like rise in popularity, seems to be the idea of digital pixel dolls. Like again, as we all know, there's this huge like Y2K resurgence for the past like maybe 4 years or more even. But I feel like digital pixel dolls, so that's virtual avatars that are made of pixels, so like specifically, intentionally two-dimensional and very like pixelated as part of the design style and the art style. Those are actually enjoying a resurgence, I feel. And the sort of, I feel like because they're pixel based, it also democratizes the process of like creating the avatars and creating the fashion for the avatars. So it's no longer that you have to sort of, I don't know, you do, obviously you do have to know how to like move pixels around and make art in that way. But I would say it's maybe slightly more accessible for people who are coming from like maybe a digital art background, but not necessarily like a digital, like, that kind of like rendering a 3D model and that sort of digital art background. People coming from a slightly more, I don't know what you say, casual or two-dimensional like digital art background. Yeah, maybe that makes it easier for them to access that, and in turn, it sort of democratizes the process of creating pixel dolls online. And so you see these huge communities of people who are creating these doll avatars. Like again, they have full range to sort of customize the molds and like the bodies, the heights, the shapes, sizes, everything, skin tones, features, and then on top of that, people have the ability to actually make the clothing. And I think that's one of the really really key things about the pixel dolls, because if you have a doll on like another platform where it might be a bit more complicated to create the clothing for them, then you kind of rely on the clothing bank that exists, like made by the platform or the brand, and then by a handful of creators who know how to kind of work that magic and like show like their talent in that way, which is great. But I feel democratizing that process of the actual products for the digital avatars is a whole other ball game, which kind of gets us into the creator economy, because in that sense, it's no longer like a sort of one directional conversation in terms of you come to the platform as a consumer, brand engages with you by feeding you items and feeding you the context and the setting and the virtual world. No, it's more like now a multi-way conversation where it's not top down, but it's actually like multi-directional, and people are creating amongst themselves, trading amongst themselves. Like if you don't like the clothing on offer, you just make your own and you can start selling that, and you can like almost like make your own digital side hustle in the metaverse or like in your virtual world, which I think is really cool, especially for ones that are marketed towards like Gen Z. That democratization and that sort of leaning into the creator economy for it is really, really interesting, because again, you might see like items and clothing and makeup styles and hair that the brands have not thought of offering. And so you get access to the cutting edge of teenage or young people's fashion and changing tastes, and like tastemakers are kind of cutting their teeth on these virtual pixel doll sites. And I think that is a really valuable insight for any company or brand that kind of hosts that and facilitates that that form of the creator economy, which is quite cool. So that's basically our show for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's been a lovely time. I love talking about my particular interests. And do stay tuned for next week's episode when we talk about the sort of impact of dolls, different fashion dolls, like physical fashion dolls, on Gen Z conceptualizations of beauty and wider societal like representations of beauty, and what that, like how society sort of views that. So yes, thank you so much, and I will see you then. Bye for now.